Stop whatever you're doing right now. Because what just happened in the last few hours inside the United States Department of Justice is something that political analysts are calling one of the most shocking power moves in modern American history. The woman who stood in front of Congress and deflected. The woman who waved around thin binders and called a constitutional scholar a washed-up loser lawyer. The woman who looked America in the eye and said the Dow being over 50,000 had everything to do with Jeffrey Epstein's secret client list. That woman is gone. Pam Bondi has been fired as Attorney General of the United States. And the way it happened? Behind closed doors, tears, begging, drama. And a man who just weeks ago called her terrific and said she'd prove how tough she was over the next 3 years, pulling the rug from underneath her feet without blinking. But here's what nobody is talking about yet, and this is the part that should send chills down your spine. Her subpoena is still active. Her deposition date is still April 14th, and the Epstein files still buried, still hidden, still classified somewhere deep inside a Department of Justice that just changed hands overnight. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand not just what happened today, but why it happened, who benefits, and what this means for every single American who has been waiting for the truth about Jeffrey Epstein's client list. This is the Prime Alert, and this story is just getting started. Segment 1, the firing, what actually happened. Let's go back to Wednesday night. Donald Trump is preparing to address the nation about Iran. It's a high-stakes moment. The cameras are ready. The teleprompter is loaded. The entire country is watching. And somewhere inside the White House, behind closed doors, away from the cameras and the microphones in the press pool, Pam Bondi, the 86th Attorney General of the United States, is reportedly on her knees. Not literally, but almost. Multiple sources, first reported by the Daily Mail, are now confirming that the night before her firing, Pam Bondi was begging, and we mean begging, Donald Trump not to fire her. The exchange, described by insiders as very dramatic, reportedly had Bondi repeating herself over and over again. Please don't fire me. Please don't fire me. Sources say she was close to tears, the kind of desperation you don't expect from someone who projected such confidence in front of Congress just weeks ago. And Trump looked at her and reportedly said 4 words. I'm going to fire you. Just like that. No lengthy negotiation, no second chances, no grace period. The same man who had publicly praised her just days before, the same man who stood in front of a crowd and said, and we have the clip, we'll play it later, that Pam Bondi was terrific and that the next 3 years she's going to really prove it, that same man ended her tenure as the nation's top law enforcement officer in what witnesses are calling one of the most dramatic White House showdowns in recent memory. And then, moments later, it was over. Donald Trump posted a message publicly, and the language, if you know how to read between the lines, tells you everything. Quote, Pam Bondi is a great American patriot and a loyal friend who faithfully served as my Attorney General over the past year. Pam did a tremendous job overseeing a massive crackdown on crime across our country, with murders plummeting to their lowest level since 1900. Now, let's pause there for a second, because that line about murder rates, those rates were already declining under President Biden. This wasn't some new achievement unlocked under Bondi's watch, but that's a conversation for another day. Trump continued, "We love Pam." And here's where you need to pay very close attention to the translation. "We love Pam" in Trump's political language almost always means don't make trouble, don't talk, don't go to the press. You're being let go, but we're doing it nicely, so you should leave nicely. It's a soft warning wrapped in public affection. We've seen this pattern before. He then wrote that she would be transitioning to a much-needed and important new job in the private sector, with family details to be announced at a later date. Private sector, a job that hasn't been named yet, a role that apparently involves things that will be announced later. In Washington, D.C., that kind of vague language almost always means one thing: She'll be working adjacent to this administration in ways that benefit people connected to it, in ways that don't require Senate confirmation, congressional oversight, or public accountability. And Trump closed by announcing that Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, a very talented and respected legal mind, in Trump's words, would step in as acting Attorney General. Todd Blanche. Remember that name. We're going to come back to it. Segment 2, the real reason. It's not Eric Swalwell. Now, the White House and its allies in the media are trying to give you a very specific reason for why Pam Bondi was fired. They want you to focus on Eric Swalwell. According to reporting from the Daily Mail, Trump's stated reasoning for the dismissal comes partly from a belief that Bondi tipped off Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell about the FBI's efforts to release investigative documents relating to Swalwell's relationship with a Chinese national named Christine Fang. That's the official sounding explanation, and maybe there's something to it, maybe there isn't. But here's the thing, and pay very close attention here, that explanation conveniently ignores the elephant that has been sitting in the middle of the room for months. The Epstein files. Let's rewind to February, because that's where this story really begins to unravel. You remember the scene. White House influencers, social media personalities invited to the White House for what was framed as a major reveal. People holding up binders, thin binders, almost comically thin binders. And Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, standing there with a smile, suggesting that the long-awaited Epstein client list was right there, right in those folders, about to be released to the American public. Except it wasn't. What followed was one of the most embarrassing fumbles in recent Justice Department history. The binders were essentially empty of any meaningful revelations. The files turned out to be nowhere near what had been promised, and Bondi, to salvage the disaster, went on television and said, and this is not paraphrased, this is what she actually said, "It's sitting on my desk right now to review." She said that the Epstein files were sitting on her desk, that she was reviewing them, that this was all part of a process directed by President Trump himself. And then nothing. Weeks passed. Months passed. The files didn't come. The client list wasn't released. Millions of documents remained sealed and hidden from public view. And every time someone pressed Bondi for answers, she pivoted, she deflected, she filibustered, and at one point, extraordinarily, she started talking about the stock market. We have the clip, and we're going to show it to you right now because you need to see this to believe it. This is Pam Bondi, the nation's top law enforcement officer, being asked about Jeffrey Epstein's secret network and responding with, "The Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing." The Dow Jones Industrial Average. In response to questions about a convicted sex trafficker's secret client list that potentially implicates some of the most powerful people on earth, that moment, that single, surreal, almost incomprehensible moment, told you everything you needed to know about where this was heading. Bondi wasn't protecting justice. She was protecting something or someone, and she was doing it badly. Donald Trump wanted a clean cover. What he got was a circus. And that, more than anything else, is why Pam Bondi is no longer the Attorney General of the United States. Segment 3. The warnings nobody listened to. Here's the thing about Washington, D.C. The signs are almost always there if you know what you're looking for. And the signs that Pam Bondi's time was running out, they were everywhere, for weeks, hidden in plain sight. Take, for example, what happened with Republican Congressman James Comer, a MAGA loyalist, someone firmly in Trump's corner, just last week. James Comer went on television and said something that, at the time, barely made headlines, but that now looks like a massive signal. He said, and we're paraphrasing here, that the Justice Department had botched the Epstein situation. He said that no avid Trump supporter, not one, could defend the way things had been rolled out. He stopped short of blaming Bondi directly by name, but the message was unmistakable. When MAGA Republicans start publicly throwing you under the bus, you are not long for your position. Full stop. And then there was the subpoena situation. This was the moment that truly revealed how desperate things had gotten inside Bondi's world. The House Oversight Committee, in a bipartisan vote, had subpoenaed Pam Bondi to appear for a closed-door deposition on April 14th, under oath, on the record, about the Epstein files and what the Justice Department was doing with them, or more accurately, what it wasn't doing with them. Now, a normal attorney general with nothing to hide would have handled this professionally. They would have shown up, answered what they legally could, invoked privilege where appropriate, and moved on. But Pam Bondi didn't do that. Instead, with just 24 hours notice, she showed up at the House Oversight Committee voluntarily, not for the subpoena deposition, not under oath, just showed up, unannounced, and basically said, "I'll tell you everything I would say at the deposition, just not under oath and not on the record." The Democrats on the committee saw through it immediately. They walked out, every single one of them. They stood up, pushed back their chairs, and left the room. Because what Bondi was attempting to do was painfully transparent. She was trying to use a voluntary, off-the-record appearance to claim she had cooperated with Congress and therefore didn't need to comply with the actual legally binding subpoena. And when reporters pressed her afterward, "Are you going to honor the subpoena? Will you show up on April 14th?" Her answer was something so carefully lawyered it almost made your head spin. "I will follow the law." That's it. That's all she said. "I will follow the law." Which, when you're the Attorney General and you've spent months concealing documents from a bipartisan congressional inquiry, is about as reassuring as a bank robber saying, "I generally support financial institutions." Segment 4, the crash out moments, a timeline of collapse. Let's take a moment and just walk through the Pam Bondi experience. Because the story of her tenure as Attorney General is, in many ways, the story of a slow-motion collapse that we all watched happen in real time. It starts with the binder stunt in February, White House influencers, thin folders, big promises, and a carefully orchestrated reveal that turned into an embarrassing non-event that convinced nobody of anything except that something was being hidden. Then comes the congressional testimony. And this is where things really go off the rails. Bondi is sitting in front of the House Oversight Committee. Democrats are pressing her on Epstein. They want answers. They want documents. They want accountability. And Bondi, rather than providing any of those things, does something extraordinary. She calls Jamie Raskin, a constitutional law professor, a former Maryland state legislator, a man with decades of legal expertise, a washed-up loser lawyer. Jamie Raskin, a washed-up loser lawyer. This is the Attorney General of the United States. And then comes the Dow Jones moment, the clip that broke the internet and that people are still talking about. Someone asks about Epstein. Someone asks about accountability, about transparency, about the promise that was made to the American people that the truth would finally come out. And Bondi looks into the camera and says, "The Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing." This is not satire. This is not a parody account. This is the real, actual, genuine response from the nation's top law enforcement officer when asked about one of the biggest cover-ups in American political history. And through all of this, through the binder stunt and the Raskin insults and the stock market non-sequiturs and the voluntary, non-sworn, non-deposition, Trump kept publicly supporting her. He called her terrific. He said she was proving how tough she is. He promised the next 3 years would really show what she was made of, and then he fired her without warning, without a transition period, after she reportedly begged him not to, tears in her eyes in a White House meeting room while the nation waited for him to speak about Iran. That is the Pam Bondi story, and it is something. Segment 5, Todd Blanche, the new hand on the wheel. So who is Todd Blanche, and why should you care? Before becoming Bondi's deputy, Todd Blanche had a very specific and very notable job. He was Donald Trump's personal criminal defense attorney. He represented Trump in the federal criminal cases brought by special counsel Jack Smith. He was in Trump's corner, arguing on Trump's behalf, working to protect Trump's legal interests at the highest possible level. And now he is the acting Attorney General of the United States. Let that sink in for a moment. The man who was personally defending Donald Trump in federal criminal proceedings is now the man in charge of the entire federal law enforcement apparatus of the country. He oversees the FBI. He oversees federal prosecutors. He oversees the very investigations and document repositories that contain the Epstein files. Fox News and state regime media, as we call them on this channel, confirmed the news of Blanche's appointment almost in real time. Their report was careful, diplomatic, the kind of coverage you get when you're delivering news that your audience might find uncomfortable, but that you've been told needs to be delivered smoothly. The anchor said there was no bad blood between Bondi and Trump, that Trump still thought she was a great person, that she would remain in the fold, just no longer as the top law enforcement officer of the United States, and that Blanche was stepping in, at least for a little while, with the suggestion that Trump might have someone else in mind for the permanent role. Lee Zeldin's name is already circulating. The former EPA director, a Trump loyalist, someone who has demonstrated in his time running the Environmental Protection Agency a willingness to dismantle institutional oversight in ways that make the White House comfortable. If Zeldin becomes the permanent attorney general, what does that mean for the Epstein files? What does that mean for the April 14th deposition? What does that mean for the millions of sealed documents that Bondi spent her entire tenure failing to release? That's the question. And right now, nobody has a clean answer. Segment 6, Congress responds, the subpoena isn't going anywhere. Here's what the people who are actually trying to get answers are saying tonight. Democratic Congressman Maxwell Frost was one of the first to respond publicly, and his message was direct and unambiguous. He posted, Pam Bondi still has to testify under oath in front of the Oversight Committee regarding the Epstein files. This does not get her out of that bipartisan lawful subpoena. We will see her soon. Read that again. This does not get her out of that bipartisan lawful subpoena. Being fired doesn't erase a subpoena. It doesn't nullify a congressional order. It doesn't make the legal obligation to appear and testify under oath disappear. If anything, being fired and moving to the private sector makes Bondi more vulnerable to that subpoena, not less, because she no longer has the shield of executive privilege and the institutional resources of the Justice Department to help her fight it. Congresswoman Summer Lee, who had been leading impeachment efforts against Bondi, posted something that reflected what a lot of people in Washington were feeling tonight. She said she was glad she hadn't listened when she was told to stop pushing for accountability. The impeachment documents had been ready, the subpoena had been filed, and now the person they'd been targeting was out. Pablo Rodriguez, a D.C. correspondent, referenced the infamous washed-up loser lawyer comment that Bondi had made about Jamie Raskin and turned it around. Who's the washed-up loser lawyer now? But here's what you need to understand about the political dynamics at play here. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Bondi's firing doesn't resolve the Epstein question. It doesn't release the files. It doesn't explain why millions of documents remain sealed. It doesn't tell us what was in those binders. It doesn't answer why, when given a direct order from the President of the United States to release the Epstein files, the Department of Justice spent months stalling, deflecting, and performing transparency rather than practicing it. The subpoena stands. April 14th is coming. And Pam Bondi, now a private citizen, has a lot fewer tools available to her to avoid sitting in that chair and answering questions under oath. Segment 7, the bigger pattern. This isn't just about Bondi. Now here's where we need to zoom out, because if you look at what's been happening inside this administration over the last several months, a pattern starts to emerge that's impossible to ignore. Kristi Noem, fired. Pam Bondi, fired. And now sources close to the administration are indicating that Tulsi Gabbard may be next. 3 high-profile women in senior cabinet positions. 3 departures in a relatively short window of time. And while the official reasons in each case are different, specific policy failures, specific controversies, specific moments of public embarrassment, the underlying dynamic feels remarkably consistent. These are people who were brought in, given enormous institutional power, asked to do things that served a specific political agenda, and when they failed to do those things in ways that satisfied the people at the top, they were removed, swiftly, publicly, and in Bondi's case, apparently, dramatically. The "we love you" posts, the "she'll have an important new role" language, the careful management of the public narrative to minimize the impression of chaos, even when the reality behind the scenes is anything but orderly. This is how power works at this level, and the people who find themselves on the wrong side of it, regardless of how loyal they've been, regardless of how many times they've defended the administration on television, regardless of how many congressional hearings they've sat through deflecting uncomfortable questions, those people don't get a second chance. They get a farewell post, a vague mention of future employment, and a flight back to wherever they came from. Pam Bondi came from Florida. She was the state's attorney general for 8 years. She had a reputation, a political future, connections, and now she's leaving the Justice Department having failed to release the Epstein files, facing a congressional subpoena, and carrying whatever she saw and heard and was asked to do during her year as the nation's top law enforcement officer. What does she know? What was she asked to do that she couldn't do or wouldn't do? What's in those files that made this entire situation so politically combustible that it ultimately cost her the job? Those are the questions that matter, and those are the questions that April 14th might begin to answer. Segment 8, what happens next? Here is where things stand right now as of today. Todd Blanche is the acting attorney general. A man who until very recently was Donald Trump's personal defense attorney is now running the Department of Justice. The Epstein files remain unreleased. Millions of documents still sealed, still hidden, despite a presidential directive, despite months of promises, despite Pam Bondi telling the American public on national television that the files were sitting on her desk. The April 14th subpoena is still active. Pam Bondi, now a private citizen, is still legally obligated to appear before the House Oversight Committee and answer questions under oath. Lee Zeldin is being floated as a potential permanent replacement for Attorney General, a man whose tenure at the EPA was defined by deregulation and institutional dismantling is now potentially heading to the nation's top law enforcement position. And somewhere in the background of all of this, somewhere in the margins of the story that the mainstream media is still trying to figure out how to cover, the question of what Jeffrey Epstein's secret network actually looked like, who was in it, who benefited from it, and who has been working to keep it buried remains completely unanswered. This is the story. This is the story. Not just the firing, not just the drama, not just the begging and the tears and the White House confrontation. The story is about what happens when the people tasked with delivering accountability fail or are prevented from delivering it. The story is about what happens when powerful institutions that are supposed to serve the public end up serving something else entirely. And the story is far, far from over. Close. Here's what I need you to do right now. If you've watched this far, you understand that what happened today isn't just political gossip. It isn't just another Washington personnel shuffle. This is a story about power, about accountability, about what the American people have a right to know, and about the extraordinary lengths that some people will go to in order to keep them from knowing it. Pam Bondi is gone, Todd Blanche is in, April 14th is coming, and the Epstein files are still buried. The Prime Alert is going to stay on this story. Every development, every leak, every congressional hearing, every moment that matters, we're going to bring it to you straight. Hit that subscribe button right now if you haven't already. We are pushing towards 7 million subscribers, and your support is what makes this kind of journalism possible. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Leave a comment below telling us what you think is actually in those Epstein files and why you think it's being buried so aggressively. We'll be back with more. Stay locked in. This is the Prime Alert. What was improved? Hook, replace the flat announcement opener with a cinematic, tension-building cold open that names the stakes, Epstein files, subpoena, power shift, before revealing the firing, creating immediate curiosity. Pacing and structure divided the script into 8 clearly labeled narrative segments, each with its own dramatic arc, so the video never stalls and always has forward momentum. Emotional triggers, added language around betrayal, desperation, and institutional corruption to keep viewers emotionally engaged throughout. Open loops, introduced questions throughout. What's in the files? Who benefits from Blanche? What does Bondi actually know that are never fully closed, compelling viewers to keep watching? Storytelling. Reframe the Bondi firing not as a standalone event, but as the climax of a months-long collapse, giving the story a beginning, middle, and end while leaving the larger narrative unresolved and ongoing. Call to action. Moved from a passive subscribe mention to an active urgent CTA woven into the emotional close of the video.